The snow fell like judgment upon the blackened bones of St. Olav's Monastery. Sister Astrid crawled through the drifts, her woolen robes torn and smoking, the acrid taste of ash thick on her tongue. Behind her, orange embers still glowed where the scriptorium had stood, where Brother Matthias had taught her to read Latin, where the illuminated Gospels had rested in their oak chest, where her entire world had existed until the longships appeared in the fjord at dawn. The screaming had stopped hours ago. Her hands were raw and bleeding, leaving crimson trails in the virgin snow as she dragged herself forward. The winter wind howled down from the mountains, carrying with it the scent of pine and death. She had no destination, only the animal instinct to move, to survive one more breath, one more heartbeat. The cold was a mercy now. It numbed the burns on her arms, the gash across her ribs where a blade had kissed her as she fled through the burning refectory. She had been in the root cellar when they came, fetching turnips for the evening meal. The first she knew of the raid was the sound of timber cracking, of men shouting in that harsh northern tongue, of Brother Eilif's voice rising in prayer before it was silenced forever. She had hidden among the vegetables like a coward while her family burned above her. The guilt was heavier than the cold. As twilight bled across the Norwegian sky, painting the snow in shades of bruised purple and dying gold, Astrid crested a small rise. Below, in a sheltered valley where two streams met beneath the shadow of towering pines, she saw the glow of campfires, tents made of hide and wool, the silhouettes of armed men moving between them, the raiders' camp. She should have turned away. Should have let the cold take her rather than face the men who had destroyed everything she loved. But her body, traitorous and desperate, began crawling down the slope toward those fires, toward warmth, toward whatever fate awaited her. She made it to the edge of the camp before her strength finally broke. She collapsed face first into the snow, her vision darkening, her frozen fingers still clawing forward out of pure stubborn will. When the rough hands grabbed her shoulders and flipped her over, she found herself staring up at a circle of bearded faces, young men mostly, their eyes bright with mead and violence. They spoke quickly in Norse, their words sharp and mocking. One reached down to tear at her robes. Enough. The single word cut through the night like a blade through silk. The men parted, and Astrid saw him. He was tall even for a Northman, with shoulders broad as a door and a face carved from the same stone as the mountains surrounding them. His hair was dark gold, streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a simple knot. A thick beard, neatly kept, framed a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that struck her, pale blue like winter ice and just as cold, just as empty. He wore no crown, no elaborate jewelry, just leather and wool, practical and worn. But the way the other men stepped back, the way they fell silent, told her everything about who commanded here. The chieftain knelt beside her in the snow. Up close she could see the scars, one running from his left eyebrow into his hairline, another across his knuckles, dozens of smaller marks that mapped a life of violence. He studied her face with those dead eyes, and she found herself unable to look away. "You are from the monastery," he said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, but his Norse was careful, almost gentle. "You survived," it wasn't a question. Astrid tried to speak, but her throat was too raw from smoke and cold. She managed only a slight nod. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name, gone before she could grasp it. He stood abruptly, his jaw tight. "Torstein," he called to one of the younger warriors. "Bring water. And blankets." The men exchanged glances, confusion rippling through the group. One of them, a red-bearded bear of a man with gold rings in his ears, stepped forward. "Jarl Eriksson," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "She is a Christian. A witness. You know what must be done." The chieftain, Jarl Eriksson, turned to face his man. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "I know what I will do in my own camp. Bjorn, fetch the blankets now." The red-bearded warrior held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and turned away. The other men dispersed, muttering among themselves, leaving Astrid alone with the chieftain in the falling snow. He looked down at her again, and this time she saw something beneath the ice in his eyes. Something old and wounded and buried deep. "I cannot say why I spare you," he said, more to himself than to her. "Perhaps the Norns have not finished weaving your thread. Perhaps they have not finished with mine." Astrid found her voice, small and broken as it was. "You burned my home. You killed my brothers. Yes. He didn't flinch from the accusation, didn't offer excuses or justifications. I did. Then why? I don't know. The admission seemed to pain him. But you will not die tonight. Not by my hand or any man here. Torstein returned with woolen blankets and a skin of water. The chieftain took them, dismissing the young warrior with a gesture, then crouched beside Astrid again. With surprising gentleness for such battle-scarred hands, he lifted her head and helped her drink. The water was cold and clean, tasting of mountain streams. Can you walk? He asked. She tried to rise and immediately collapsed back into the snow. Her legs useless, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and shock. Without a word, Jarl Eriksson gathered her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. She was too weak to protest, too stunned by the strange mercy of this moment. He carried her through the camp, ignoring the stares of his men, and brought her to the largest tent at the center, his own. Inside, it was warm. A brazier glowed with coals and furs covered the ground. He laid her gently on a pile of blankets near the heat, then wrapped her in the wool coverings. For a moment he paused, looking at her with that same unreadable expression. "My men will not touch you," he said. "You have my word for what the word of a murderer is worth." "Why?" Astrid whispered, tears finally breaking through her shock, cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. "Why did you do it?" "We harmed no one. We offered prayers and shelter. We had nothing worth. The king's gold was worth it." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Your abbot stored tribute there." "Tribute owed to Harold. I was paid to retrieve it. Brother Eilif, the others. For gold? For survival." He stood, towering over her, his shadow falling long in the firelight. "I am exiled, girl, outlawed. My lands are forfeit, my name struck from the rolls. These men follow me because they too have nowhere else to go. When a king offers gold for a simple raid..." He trailed off, jaw tightening. "I did what I had to do." "You had a choice," Astrid said, finding steel in her voice despite the tears. "You always have a choice." Something flashed in his eyes then. Pain, she thought, or perhaps recognition. He looked away. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow we move deeper into the mountains. The king's soldiers will come looking for whoever took his gold, and they will not be as merciful as I have been." He turned to leave, but Astrid's voice stopped him. "What is your name? Your true name?" He paused at the tent's entrance, his back to her, broad and heavy with invisible burdens. "Eric Halvardsson," he said quietly. "Once Jarl of Ringerike, once husband and father, now nothing but a ghost walking in a dead man's skin." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the warmth with 1,000 questions and a single, impossible truth. The man who had destroyed her world had just saved her life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the tracks that led from monastery to camp, from past to uncertain future. And in the distance, wolves began to howl, a sound like grief, like warning, like the song of survival in the long Norwegian winter. 3 days into the mountains, and Astrid learned that surviving could be harder than dying. The warband moved like shadows through the snow, following game trails and hidden passes that only Eric seemed to know. Astrid rode on a small mare, wrapped in furs and wool, still too weak to walk for long. The men largely ignored her, though she felt their eyes on her back, heard their muttered conversations die when she drew near. Only young Torstein showed her any kindness, bringing her dried fish and water without being asked, offering a shy smile that reminded her painfully of brother Linus, the youngest novice at the monastery. Eric kept his distance. He rode at the front, his back straight despite the wind that screamed down from the peaks. His face turned toward a destination only he could see. At night she slept in his tent while he stayed outside by the fire, wrapped in his cloak, apparently immune to the cold that would kill lesser men. She didn't understand it. Didn't understand him. On the 4th night, when they made camp in a valley so deep the sun never quite reached its floor, Astrid found herself unable to sleep. The wind howled like tortured spirits through the canyon walls, and every sound made her think of that morning. The crack of burning timber, the screams cut short, the smell of burning flesh and sacred incense mixing in the smoke. She rose from her furs and stepped outside. The camp was quiet, most men already asleep. Only a few sat around the dying fire, passing a drinking horn and speaking in low voices. Eric sat apart from them, his back against a boulder, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. Astrid approached slowly. He didn't turn, but she knew he'd heard her. Nothing escaped this man's notice. "You should be resting," he said. "The cold will set your wounds back." "I cannot sleep." She sat near him, not too close, maintaining a careful distance. "The wind sounds like voices." "It does." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Especially when you've given the wind reason to speak." She looked at him more closely in the flickering firelight. His face was drawn, exhausted. She wondered when he last slept truly, not just the warrior's half-rest where a man remains ready to wake and kill at the slightest sound. "How long have you been exiled?" she asked, his jaw tightened. "Why does it matter?" "Because I'm trying to understand the man who killed my family but won't let me die." A long silence stretched between them, filled only with wind and the crack of coals settling in the fire pit. 2 years, he finally said. 24 months. 730 days, though I stopped counting after the first 100. "What did you do? To be outlawed, I mean." His laugh was bitter, empty of humor. "I killed a man. A Jarl, actually, Sigurd of Vestfold. He was the king's cousin." Astrid waited, sensing there was more. "He came to my hall while I was away fighting in the king's wars. My wife, Thora, she was beautiful, clever, strong. She refused him." Eric's voice had gone flat, emotionless, but Astrid could hear the rage buried beneath like magma under ice. "So he took her anyway. And when my son, my 8-year-old boy, tried to stop him, Sigurd killed him too. Made it look like they were attacked by outlaws while I was gone." Astrid felt her breath catch. "Oh God. I found out the truth when I returned. A thrall woman hiding in the woods told me everything. So I went to Sigurd's hall. I challenged him before his men in the old way with witnesses. He refused. Said I was mad with grief, seeing conspiracy where there was only tragedy. Eric's hands clenched into fists, so I killed him anyway. In front of his household, in front of the king's men. And because he was cousin to Harold, because there were no witnesses to what he'd done to my family, I was declared outlaw, 3 winters of exile. Any man may kill me without crime. All my lands, my wealth, everything I built, forfeit. I'm sorry, Astrid whispered, and meant it. I'm so sorry. Don't be. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw that what she'd mistaken for coldness was actually a grief so profound it had frozen him from the inside out. I got what I wanted. Sigurd died screaming. The fact that my life ended with his, he shrugged. A fair trade. But you're still alive. No, Eric said simply. I'm a Draugr, a walking corpse. The man I was died with his wife and son. What remains is just meat and memory and the need to keep these men alive until spring. Astrid understood then. The distance, the gentleness mixed with violence, the dead eyes that occasionally flickered with something human before going cold again. This was a man who had cut out his own heart rather than feel it break. That's why you spared me, she said. Because I remind you of her. Of your wife. No. He shook his head. Thora was fire and iron. He searched for words. You're something else. Something I can't name. When you looked at me in the snow, when you should have been cursing me or begging for your life, you just looked. Like you could see the ghost inside the armor. Like you weren't afraid of what you saw. I was terrified, Astrid admitted. I still am. But you came out here anyway. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone so quickly she almost missed it. Either you're very brave or very foolish. Both, probably. The abbot always said I had too much curiosity for a nun. You're not a nun. Not yet. I was still in training. Another 2 years, they said, before I could take my final vows. She pulled her cloak tighter against the wind. Now I suppose it doesn't matter. There's no monastery to return to. They sat in silence for a while, 2 ghosts haunted by different fires, finding unexpected comfort in shared loss. Can you read? Astrid asked suddenly. Eric looked surprised by the question. Runes, yes. All boys of noble families learn the runes. Why, your sword, the one you wear. I saw markings on the blade when you... She didn't finish the sentence. When you spared my life. May I see it? He hesitated, then drew the weapon. It was a beautiful piece. Pattern-welded steel with a subtle wave running through the blade, the hilt wrapped in leather and silver wire. But what caught Astrid's attention were the runes carved along the fuller, inlaid with gold. She leaned closer, studying them in the firelight. Brother Matthias had taught her about runes during her studies of northern peoples. Know thy neighbors, he'd said. even if they worship different gods. Can you read them? She asked. Eric frowned, turning the blade so the firelight caught the letters. I know the shapes, but the meaning, I learned the basics as a boy but never fully mastered the reading. My father said combat was more important than poetry. May I? He handed her the sword. It was heavier than she expected, balanced for a warrior's hand, not a scholar's. She traced the runes with her finger, careful not to touch the edge. This blade knows my name, she read slowly. This blade knows my name. Eric stared at her. You can read them? Brother Matthias taught me. He believed we should understand the old ways as well as the new. That wisdom comes from many sources, not just... She stopped, remembering that Brother Matthias was dead, that all of them were dead, because this man needed gold. But Eric wasn't looking at her with guilt. He was looking at the sword with something like wonder. My grandfather had this made, he said quietly. Before he died, he told me it was spelled with protection, that it would never fail me in battle. I always thought it was just old stories. But if it truly says what you claim, there's more. Astrid turned the blade, finding another line of runes near the crossguard. Let no man die without honor. Let no man die without honor. The words hung in the cold air between them. Eric reached out slowly and took the sword back, staring at the runes as if seeing them for the first time. Without honor, he repeated, his voice barely audible. I've killed priests and burned a house of God for gold. What honor remains in that? You spared me, Astrid said. Against your own interests, against the logic of survival, you chose mercy. That's honor, isn't it? The choice to be human when everything says to be a monster. He looked at her with those ice-blue eyes, and for the first time, she saw them truly break, not with tears, but with something deeper. Recognition, connection, the acknowledgement that he wasn't quite as dead as he'd believed. You should hate me, he said. You should curse my name and pray for my damnation. I do, Astrid admitted. Some nights I lie awake and imagine all the ways God might punish you. But then I remember that you carry your own punishment, that you're already damned by your own hand, by your own guilt. What mercy could I give or withhold that you haven't already denied yourself? Eric was silent for a long moment. Then, surprising them both, he said, Would you teach me? To read the runes properly, I mean. There are other blades in camp, other carvings. I'd like to know what they say. What my grandfather tried to tell me. Astrid should have refused, should have held on to her anger, her grief, her righteous fury. But something in his question, the humility of it, the vulnerability of a warrior admitting he needed help reading his own language, broke through her defenses. Yes, she said. I'll teach you. And so began the strange education of Eric Halvardson. Each night after the men slept, Astrid and Eric would sit by the fire while she taught him to truly read the runes carved into weapons and amulets, to understand the poetry and power woven into his grandfather's legacy. He was a quick student, his warrior's mind sharp and focused when given a purpose beyond survival. In return, though she never asked, Eric began to teach her the ways of the North. He showed her how to read the stars for direction, how to tell good ice from weak, how to move silently through snow. He taught her the names of things in Norse, sky and stone and sword, and she taught him bits of Latin and the prayers she'd memorized in the monastery. Pater Noster, Cuias in Caelus, she would recite, and he would repeat the words with his rough accent, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. What does it mean? He asked one night. Our Father, who art in heaven. It's how we address God. Your God, he corrected gently. Perhaps, but Brother Matthias used to say that all gods listen to sincere prayers whether we know their proper names or not. Eric smiled, a real smile this time, small and fleeting but genuine. Your Brother Matthias sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Astrid felt tears prick her eyes. He taught me that knowledge is sacred, that understanding is its own form of worship, that we're all just trying to make sense of the darkness. Then I honor his memory, Eric said, with such seriousness that Astrid knew he meant it. By learning what he taught you, I honor him. It was a gift she hadn't expected, this rough warrior honoring a dead monk through the simple act of learning. And in that moment, Astrid felt the first crack in the wall of her hatred. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer, something that acknowledged that people were more than their worst actions, that ghosts could learn to be human again if given reason and time. The warband pressed deeper into the mountains, following paths that led away from the king's justice and toward an uncertain future. And in the tent of the exiled chieftain, two ghosts learned each other's languages, trading runes for prayers, starlight for scripture, slowly building something neither could name but both desperately needed. Outside, the wolves still howled, but inside, in the warm glow of the brazier, the dead were learning to speak again. Winter's grip loosened slowly in the Norwegian highlands, measured not in days but in tiny victories, a stream that ran unfrozen, a patch of earth visible through thinning snow, the tentative return of ravens to the valley below Eric's hidden camp. Astrid had been with the war band for 6 weeks when the king's men finally found them. It happened at dawn. Astrid was awake, as always, her sleep still fractured by nightmares of burning. She'd been sitting outside Eric's tent, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, when Torstein came running from the ridge where he'd been on watch. "Riders," he gasped, his young face pale with fear. 20, maybe more. The king's banner. The camp exploded into controlled chaos. Men grabbed weapons, struck tents prepared for either battle or flight. Eric emerged from the tent line where he'd been sleeping, his sword already in hand, his eyes sharp and clear despite being woken from dead sleep. "How far?" he demanded. "An hour, maybe less if they're pushing hard." Eric's jaw tightened. He looked around at his men. 30 warriors, most of them young, all of them dependent on his leadership for survival. Then his eyes found Astrid, and something complicated passed through his expression. "We can't outrun them with wagons," Bjorn said, coming up beside his jarl. "Not in this terrain." "I know." Eric's mind was clearly racing, calculating odds and options. "We stand and fight." "Against the king's housecarls?" Bjorn shook his head. "Eric, these men are farmers' sons and second brothers. Good fighters, but not. Then we make the terrain fight for us." Eric turned to his men, his voice carrying across the camp with that authority that made hardened warriors straighten their backs. "Listen, we'll position at the narrow pass where the valley pinches. They'll have to come at us in groups, not as a mass. We can hold them there, make them pay for every step." It was a good plan, a warrior's plan, and it would probably get them all killed. Astrid found herself standing, her legs still weak but her mind clear. "There's another way." The men turned to look at her. Eric frowned. "This isn't your concern, sister. Get back to the tent, I'm the concern," Astrid interrupted, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I'm the witness. I'm what they're actually hunting. Not the gold, you've already moved that. They want to make sure no one saw you take the king's tribute, no one who can testify that you were acting on the king's orders." Silence fell over the camp. Eric's face had gone very still. "How did you—" "I'm not stupid, and I've been listening. You said the king paid you for that raid. But kings don't like loose ends. A band of outlaws stealing tribute is one thing, but if anyone discovered the king himself ordered the raid that he stole from his own church?" Astrid looked around at the men. "You're not thieves. You're witnesses," he needs silenced. Bjorn cursed in Norse. Several other men exchanged dark looks. Eric said nothing, but the set of his shoulders told her she'd struck the truth. "So give them what they want," Astrid continued. "Give them me." "No." Eric's response was immediate and absolute. "I won't." "You won't have to. I'll go on my own. Walk out to meet them under a white flag. Tell them I escaped you in the night, that I don't know where you've gone. They'll take me back to the capital, question me, probably put me in a convent somewhere to keep me quiet, but your men will be safe." "They'll kill you," Eric said flatly. "The moment you're no longer useful, they'll silence you permanently. The king doesn't take chances, perhaps, or perhaps God will protect me. Either way, it's better than you all dying here for someone who isn't even one of you." The logic was sound and everyone knew it. But Eric was shaking his head, his hand gripping his sword so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I saved you," he said, and there was something raw in his voice, something that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy. "I didn't pull you from that snow just to send you to your death now. Why did you save me?" Astrid asked, stepping closer to him, aware of all the eyes watching them. "Really? You've never answered that question." Eric looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a truth he'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. "Because when I saw you crawling through that snow, when you looked up at me with those eyes, I saw Thora, not her face, you look nothing like her. But that fire, that refusal to give up even when everything was lost, and I thought—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought maybe if I could save you, it would somehow balance what I couldn't save in her. I know it's foolish. I know it changes nothing, but I couldn't let you die, not then, not now. The admission hung in the cold morning air. Astrid felt her throat tighten, felt tears threatening, but she pushed them back. Then let me save you in return, she said quietly. Let me give you the chance to get your men to safety. It's what she would want, isn't it? For you to choose life instead of choosing to die like you've been doing these 2 years? Before Eric could respond, a shout came from the ridge. The riders were visible now, their horses dark against the snow, moving fast. Eric closed his eyes for a moment, his whole body tense with impossible choice. When he opened them again, something had changed in his face. Not acceptance, but recognition that some battles couldn't be won with swords. If we do this, he said, you take Torstein with you, as a guide. He's young, the king's men might spare him. He'll see you safe to the nearest settlement, then return here. Eric, I can't, Torstein started. You can and you will. Eric turned to the young warrior. This woman saved every man in this camp today. We honor that debt by protecting her as far as we're able. Torstein nodded, his face solemn. Eric looked at Astrid for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed a leather cord from around his neck. Hanging from it was a small silver pendant, Thor's hammer intricately carved with runes. My wife gave me this, he said, on our wedding day. It's the last thing I have of her. He placed it in Astrid's palm, closing her fingers around it. Carry it. If you're captured, if you need help, find a woman named Gudrun in Trondheim. She was Thora's sister. Show her this. Tell her I sent you. She'll protect you or at least give you shelter. I can't take this, Astrid whispered. It's too precious. That's why I'm giving it to you. His hand was warm over hers, rough with calluses and scars. So you have to survive. So you have to return it to me someday. The implication in those words, that there would be a someday, that their paths would cross again, made Astrid's heart do something complicated in her chest. I'll teach you the rest of the runes, she found herself saying, absurdly, given the circumstances. All the ones we didn't finish. I'll hold you to that. Eric smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, warming them from winter ice to summer sky. Go quickly, the farewell was swift. Torstein gathered supplies and saddled 2 horses. The other men, rough warriors who'd been ignoring her for weeks, each nodded to her as she passed, a gesture of respect, of gratitude for her sacrifice. At the edge of camp, Eric caught her arm. Astrid, he said, using her name for the first time. Your brother Matthias was right. Knowledge is sacred. But so is this, what you're doing. Choosing to save lives instead of seeking vengeance. That's holier than any prayer. Then why does it hurt so much? Because it's real. Pain means something matters. He released her arm. Survive. That's an order from your Jarl. You're not my Jarl. No. But I'm asking anyway. Astrid mounted her horse, Torstein beside her. As they rode out of camp toward the approaching riders, she looked back once. Eric stood at the edge of the tree line, one hand raised in farewell, looking more alive than she'd ever seen him, and more afraid. The meeting with the king's men went as expected. They were suspicious, hostile, clearly under orders to leave no witnesses. But Astrid's story, that she'd escaped during the night, that the outlaws had fled deeper into the mountains, was plausible enough. They had no proof she was lying, and Torstein's presence as a rescuer who'd found her wandering supported the tale. The captain, a hard-eyed man named Arne, studied her for a long moment. You're lucky, he said. Most don't survive encounters with Eric the Ghost, is that what they call him? Among other things. The man's a phantom. We've been hunting him for 2 years, and he's always 3 steps ahead. Arne gestured to his men. You'll ride with us back to Bergen. The bishop will want to speak with you about the monastery. As they traveled, Astrid kept her hand closed around the Thor's hammer pendant, hidden beneath her cloak. Torstein rode beside the soldiers, playing his part perfectly, but occasionally their eyes would meet and she'd see the question there. Did we do the right thing? She didn't have an answer. She only knew that somewhere in the mountains behind them, Eric and his men were alive, and that had to count for something. 3 days later they reached Bergen. The city sprawled along the harbor, its wooden buildings painted in bright colors, its docks crowded with ships from across the known world. It was the first real settlement Astrid had seen since the monastery burned, and the sheer noise and life of it was overwhelming. They brought her to the bishop's hall, a stone building near the cathedral. Bishop Olaf was an old man with kind eyes and a politician's smile. He questioned her gently about the raid, about what she'd seen, about whether she could identify any of the raiders. Astrid lied smoothly, surprising herself. No, she'd been hiding. No, she hadn't seen faces. No, she couldn't identify anyone. The bishop seemed satisfied, or at least unwilling to press a traumatized young woman too hard. "You'll stay here," he said, "in the cathedral's convent. Sister Ingrid will see to your needs. In time, perhaps you might take your vows here if St. Olav's cannot be rebuilt." It was a kind offer, a safe offer, everything she should want. But that night, lying in a clean bed with clean sheets for the first time in months, Astrid found herself unable to sleep. Not from nightmares, but from the absence of something. The sound of men talking in Norse around a campfire, the smell of pine smoke, the weight of a certain pair of ice-blue eyes watching her from across the tent. She clutched the Thor's hammer, pendant, and whispered a prayer. Though whether to the Christian, God, or the Norse gods, or just to the universe itself, she couldn't say. Keep him safe. Keep them all safe. And if it's your will, let our paths cross again. Outside her window, winter was finally breaking. Ice dripped from the eaves. In the harbor, the first ships prepared to sail with the spring winds, and somewhere in the mountains, she knew, a ghost was learning to be human again, one rune at a time. Spring came to Norway like a prayer answered, slowly, tentatively, as if afraid to believe winter had truly released its grip. Astrid had been in Bergen for 3 months when the summons came. She'd settled into the rhythm of convent life, or at least the appearance of it. She attended services, helped in the infirmary, copied manuscripts in the scriptorium. The other sisters were kind, if distant, still unsure what to make of the monastery survivor who'd arrived under the king's guard. Bishop Olaf checked on her occasionally, his questions always gentle but probing, as if he suspected she knew more than she claimed. She'd heard nothing of Eric, nothing of the warband. The winter had been harsh. The talk in the market was of villages snowed in, of travelers who'd tried to cross the mountains and never arrived. Every time she heard such stories, Astrid's hand would drift to the Thor's hammer pendant hidden beneath her robes, and she'd whisper a prayer to gods both old and new. Then on a bright morning in late April, as the fjord sparkled with melted ice and the first flowers pushed through the thawing earth, Sister Ingrid found her in the garden. "Child, there's someone here for you. A woman," she says. "Well, you'd better come." Astrid followed her to the convent's receiving room, her heart suddenly pounding. Standing by the window was a woman of perhaps 40, tall and striking, with blonde hair bound in elaborate braids and eyes the color of summer sky. Eric's eyes. "You're Gudrun," Astrid said. The woman turned, and her gaze went immediately to Astrid's chest, where the pendant hung hidden. "He sent you. My sister's husband." "Is he?" "He was alive when I left him, 3 months ago in the high mountains." Gudrun's face showed no emotion, but Astrid saw her hands clench briefly. "And the pendant? How did you come by it?" Astrid reached beneath her robes and drew it out. The silver caught the sunlight, the runes seeming to glow. Gudrun drew in a sharp breath. "I was there when Thora gave him that. Her wedding gift. She'd had the runes carved herself, said they would protect him in battle." Gudrun reached out as if to touch it, then pulled back. "He would never give this away. Unless he needed me to survive," Astrid finished. "Unless he wanted to give me a reason to live." Gudrun studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You care for him. The ghost of Ringerike, the outlaw, the man who burned your monastery. You care for him." It wasn't a question, but Astrid answered anyway. "I shouldn't. By every god and every law, I should curse his name. But yes, I care for him." "Good." Gudrun's response surprised her. "Because I need your help to save him," she explained quickly, her voice low. Eric had emerged from the mountains with the spring thaw, his men half-starved but alive. They'd been raiding supply lines, living like wolves, staying one step ahead of the king's hunters. But Harold was losing patience. He'd put an enormous price on Eric's head, enough that even loyal men might be tempted to betray him. "I am Eric Halvardsson," he announced, his voice carrying across the assembly. "Once Jarl of Ringerike. I come to seek justice before this assembly, as is my right as a free man of Norway." "You are outlawed," the king said coldly. "You have no rights. I have the right to speak at the thing. That law is older than any king's decree. Eric looked at Håkon. Law speaker, I invoke the ancient privilege. Håkon, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He may speak. Let the assembly hear him. The king's jaw clenched, but he nodded curtly. Eric stepped forward. 2 years ago, I was outlawed for killing Sigurd of Vestfold. The king claims I murdered him in cold blood, that I was mad with grief over my family's accidental death. He paused, letting the words sink in. But Sigurd didn't die because I was mad. He died because he raped my wife and killed my son, and the king knew it. A shocked murmur ran through the assembly. Harold's face remained impassive, but Astrid saw his hands grip the arms of his chair. Last winter, Eric continued, I led a raid on St. Olav's Monastery. We burned it, killed the monks, took the gold stored there. He looked directly at Harold. The king will tell you I did this as an outlaw, desperate for wealth. But the truth is, the king himself paid me to do it. He wanted the church's tribute, gold that should have gone to Rome. He hired outlaws to steal it so he could claim innocence. Lies. Harold was on his feet. The ravings of a bitter, broken man. I have proof. Eric produced the documents from his tunic. Orders bearing the king's seal, letters discussing payment, correspondence from the king's own hand. Håkon took the documents, studying them carefully. His face showed nothing, but Astrid saw his eyes narrow. These could be forged, Harold said. Outlaws are skilled at such deceptions. Then perhaps you'll believe a witness, Eric said. Someone who was there. Someone with no reason to lie for me. This was the moment. Astrid stood, her heart hammering, and walked forward into the circle. She felt every eye turn to her, the king's hard and calculating, Eric's surprised and worried, Gudrun's encouraging. I am Sister Astrid, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I was a novice at St. Olav's Monastery. I survived the raid. The crowd erupted in whispers. The king's face had gone pale. The abbot, Brother Eilif, showed me the king's letters, Astrid continued. He was confused by them, troubled. The king was demanding the tribute be kept at the monastery instead of sent to Rome. He said it was for safekeeping. But the abbot suspected the truth, that the king planned to steal it and blame outlaws. Why should we believe you? One of the jarls called out. You're traveling with the outlaw. Clearly you're his ally. I have every reason to hate Eric Halvardsson, Astrid said, and her voice cracked slightly. He killed my family, burned my home. By every law of God and man, I should want him dead. She looked at Eric, saw the pain in his eyes. But I was raised to speak truth, whatever the cost. And the truth is that the king ordered that raid. The truth is that an innocent man was outlawed for seeking justice for his murdered family. The truth is that Harold Hardrada values gold more than honor. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the law speaker spoke. The evidence is compelling, the witness credible. King Harold, you must answer these charges. What happened next was chaos. The king's men drew swords. Eric's warriors did the same. The jarls shouted, some supporting Harold, others demanding answers. It could have become a bloodbath. But then an old jarl named Olaf, no relation to the bishop, stepped forward, his white beard flowing, his presence commanding immediate silence. Enough, he said. We are Norsemen. We settle disputes with law, not slaughter. If the king is guilty, he must face judgment. If Eric lies, he dies. But this ends here, in the old way. Trial by combat. Let the gods decide. It was an ancient solution, one that couldn't be refused without dishonor. Harold's face twisted with rage, but he nodded. Very well. My champion against the outlaw. Tomorrow, at dawn. Eric's eyes found Astrid's across the assembly ground. In them, she saw gratitude, fear, and something else, something that made her breath catch. That night they met in secret at Gudrun's safe house near the fjord. Eric sat at the table, cleaning his sword, the one with the runes Astrid had taught him to read. "You shouldn't have come," he said without looking up. "You should have stayed safe in Bergen." "Since when do you get to decide what I should do?" "Since I'm about to die for you tomorrow." Astrid moved closer, her anger flaring. "You're not dying for me. You're fighting for justice, for your wife, for your son, for all the right reasons you abandoned when you became a ghost. And if I lose, then I'll testify that you died with honor, that you finally became the man your grandfather's sword said you should be." Eric looked up at her, and the rawness in his expression nearly broke her. "Why do you believe in me? After everything I've done, why do you think I'm worth saving?" Astrid took his scarred hands in hers. "Because you taught me that people are more than their worst moments. Because you showed me that mercy is stronger than vengeance. Because when I was lost, you gave me a reason to keep walking. Let me do the same for you." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, both of them trembling with emotion neither had words for. "If I survive," he whispered, "if by some miracle the gods favor me tomorrow, will you stay? Not as a captive, not as a debt, but as—" "Yes," Astrid said, before he could finish. "Whatever you're asking, yes." They sat together through the night, neither sleeping, both holding on to something precious and fragile and worth fighting for. Dawn came cold and clear. The combat grounds were on the beach, watched by the assembly. The king's champion was a giant named Rolf, famous throughout Norway for his strength. He carried an axe that looked like it could split mountains. Eric stood, opposite him with just his grandfather's sword and a shield. He looked small by comparison, but his eyes were clear, alive. For the first time since Thora died, he had something to live for. The fight was brutal. Rolf's axe shattered Eric's shield on the first blow. Eric danced back, using speed where he lacked strength, finding openings in the giant's defense. Blood flowed on both sides. The beach sand turned dark. Then, just when it seemed Rolf would overwhelm him, Eric feinted left and struck right. A perfect killing blow that took the champion in the throat. Rolf fell, his blood mingling with the tide. Eric stood over him, chest heaving, and looked at the king. The gods have spoken. Harold's face was stone, but he knew when he was beaten. Your outlawry is lifted, your lands restored. But leave my sight, Eric Halvardsson. If I see you again, no law will protect you. It was as close to an admission of guilt as they would get. The assembly dispersed, some celebrating, others muttering. But justice, rough and imperfect, had been done. Eric walked from the beach to where Astrid waited. He was bloody and exhausted, but his eyes were summer sky blue, warm and alive and full of tomorrow. "I survived," he said. "You did more than that. You lived." Astrid touched his face gently. "Welcome back from being a ghost." He kissed her then, in front of the assembly and the gods and the whole wide world. A kiss that tasted of salt and blood and hope. They were married 3 months later, in a small church near Eric's restored hall. Gudrun stood witness, crying openly for the sister who couldn't be there but would have loved this. The ceremony was both Christian and Norse, prayers and runes intertwined, 2 worlds finding common ground in love. Eric rebuilt his hall, but he never forgot the lessons learned in his exile. He ruled justly, gave generously to churches and temples alike, and kept counsel with both priests and skalds. His people called him Eric the Just now, though some still whispered Eric the Ghost when they thought he couldn't hear. Astrid never took her final vows as a nun. Instead, she became a scholar, collecting manuscripts, teaching anyone who wanted to learn, bridging the gap between the old ways and the new. She and Eric had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl they named Thora. On winter nights when snow fell soft on Norway's peaks, Eric and Astrid would sit by the fire. He would read runes on ancient weapons while she transcribed them into Latin. Their children would listen to stories of monasteries and war camps, of mercy found in unexpected places, of how 2 broken people learned to be whole again. And sometimes, when the fire burned low and the children slept, Eric would take out the Thor's hammer pendant, kept safe all these years, and place it in Astrid's palm. "Thank you," he would say, as he had 100 times before, for teaching me how to live again. And Astrid would smile and reply as she always did, "Thank you for giving me a reason to." Outside, the wolves would howl, but they were distant now, their song no longer threatening. Just part of the night's music, reminding them that they'd survived the darkness and found light on the other side. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for, to crawl through the snow and find someone waiting by the fire, to be broken and find someone who understood, to be a ghost and learn, one rune at a time, how to be human again.